other forms of torture against my son looked like mafia work or just straight up torture and abuse of a child. I couldn't totally connect it to kind of like a programming sort of idea or to government, even though government people were concealing this. I really couldn't bring myself to that conclusion until my son said, "Do this to me. Do this, Mom. Mama, do this." And then he picked up this horse and he showed me how he wanted me to put it in front of his eyes. And I held it up. I said, "Okay, like this?" He says, "Yes." He says, "Now have it go over here and then have it go over here. And say this." And I don't remember what it was he wanted me to say, but he wanted me to hold this horse and then move it back and forth and say something repeatedly. And he kept saying, "No, no, do it like this." And then he started sucking his thumb a little bit. And I thought he was falling asleep at first, and then I saw all of a sudden, I realized he's going into a trance. He was showing me, and he had tried to have me do it before with the same horse, the same figurine. So somebody had been, like a month or two earlier, so somebody had been practicing, had been doing this to him for quite a while. But by that time he was older and he was able to talk and be understood. And then he was directing me on what to do in front of him. And I had noticed, well, how come every time I bring up these horses and do this thing in front of him, he starts acting like he's going to fall asleep? And I literally thought, well, is somebody, maybe he got to take them home and he sleeps with them at night at the Avilat's house. I mean, here I'm thinking of like everything that could possibly come to mind, trying to figure out why my son is reacting this way around those toys specifically. And then when he, as I say, got older, and he was already, like, as I say, he could talk very early. He was speaking at a very young age. And then something happened to disorganize his speech and ability to speak. So he would still try to speak, but he couldn't get the words out that he wanted to use. And so then he's directing me, when he was older, he's directing me on how to hypnotize him. And then I saw that he wasn't falling asleep. He was going into a hypnotic state. And my son was directing me on how to do it. And that's when I said to Anne something about this is like hypnosis. And after that, the state cut off all the visits. They basically terminated my parental rights right about then. It was like a couple weeks later. And I don't even believe I had another visit, really. Like, it was canceled or something after that. I mean, they freaked out because I had figured out that it was hypnosis. And by the time I realized it was hypnosis, that's when I knew, okay, that's a nail in the coffin for the state and for the government. Because hypnosis is not something that the Mexican mafia does. I mean, I'm sure that they are connected to some people who do that or know how to do that. Yeah. But that is not, a primary interest of a cartel, in how to hypnotize little kids with My Little Pony horses. I mean, is it? You tell me what mafia or cartel or drug gang or anything. You tell me which one is going to be spending his time trying to hypnotize little boys with purple, the purple little figure for the My Little Pony figurine before the age of 3. The other thing that happened to my son was he threw up explosively. He was given something that was going to cause him to throw up, and he threw up bright blue throw up all over the floor, and Anne Crane was smirking and laughing and thought it was funny and watching for my reaction. And the other thing that he said, "Mama, I'm sick," and then it was all over. It's basically like someone did something to him, and just a few, like about 15 minutes earlier to cause him to throw up. And he had other forms of injuries that he showed up with. He had a chipped tooth. I was told he came in to one of the visits looking totally dazed again, and like he was in shock. And I later asked what had happened because his entire front of his tooth was chipped, and I was told that, oh, he fell against the edge of a table. He didn't fall against the edge of a table because nobody chips a tooth in that way against the edge of a table. I'm not a forensic scientist, but I have enough common sense to know what angles would be required to create that kind of an injury, and that doesn't add up. And my son was also being degraded and told to take his shirt sleeve down off of one of his shoulders and to basically start talking in a sexual way. When he was about 3 years old, he was pulling his shirt down to his elbow and raising his shoulder up. And this was after I'd put a couple of photos of myself online. It was basically to mock me for putting anything about myself online. And then they had my son posing. They degraded him by having him pose and pulling his shirt down and acting sexual, in a sexual manner. He also tried to demonstrate French kissing with me, and I never French kissed my son. But he was clearly being taught by somebody from the government how to French kiss, because my son, instead of just kissing me, he kept trying to press his face against mine and then opened his mouth and put his tongue into my mouth. This is the United States Child Protective Services that is using children and committing the crime of human trafficking. And that Georgia woman who died, the senator who died, and her husband who died, they did not commit suicide. They were murdered because they were exposing what this country is doing with that department. The other thing that my son, and the entire time Ann Crane is making these little clinical documentation notes, trying to make me sound crazy, but also trying to get it into the record for somebody, how well their programming is working and how my son is responding to it. My son was and right around the time that he was French kissing me, that's when Michelle Erickson was again saying to me, just be thankful that he's with your family. Because every time I tried to bring up a complaint about what was going on with my child, or suggested anything, they basically tried to suggest that if they took him away from the Avilas and put him somewhere else, it was going to be worse. So you better not talk. And really, it wasn't that I was talking about the Avilas. It's the state. It's the government. They're the ones who are the criminals. They're committing the crimes. They're the ones intimidating witnesses to those crimes from saying anything to the public about what's really happening. He was also being degraded with when I had taken this video clip of my son where I had uploaded it onto YouTube, which was right after Alvaro left and before he was being tortured visibly in front of me. He was counting all the way up to like 30 on his own, and when he was very young, he was very good with numbers. Well, somebody decided to degrade him and confuse him, and they were teaching him to count out of order. So then he was coming to the visits counting totally out of order, so he wasn't counting in a linear way anymore, because somebody had decided to dumb my son down for some group that wanted my son to look stupid, and they were trying to confuse my son, and they traumatized him by doing that. So they were not only trying to confuse him and disorganize the things that he had already learned, they were torturing him, They were sexually assaulting him, physically abusing him, and the United States government has so far covered up for all of it. And I expect an apology to my son. I expect the United Kingdom to apologize to my son. I expect Canada to apologize to my son.